Well, good morning to you guys. We're going to be in the 141st Psalm this morning. And the 141st Psalm is essentially a prayer of David, and it's a prayer for safety from Satan's snares. So what I'd like to do this morning is read through this psalm, explain it to you just a bit, and then because I've lived this in a peculiar way these last 2 weeks, I'll tell you a little bit about my trip to Sudan, and then at the end we'll try to pull out some application from Psalm 141. Just so you know, for those of you purists, this will not be an expositional Bible study. I'm kind of intentionally going to butcher Psalm 141 for my own purposes. Okay? Verse 1, Lord, I cry out to you. Make haste to me. Give ear to my voice when I cry out to you. Verse 2, let my prayer be set before you as incense, as the lifting up of my hands, as the evening sacrifice. Now, there are a few things I want to pull out in this psalm. The first one being verse 2, that the psalmist prays that his prayer would be set before the Lord as incense. Now, we often mistake incense here in America in Western culture. When I used to work for the cable company and I would go into homes regularly, if I smelled incense burning, the first thing I assumed was they were burning it to cover up pot. But the reality is, in Eastern cultures, that's not the case. That they burn incense as an aromatic fragrance, and they often use it in their worship services. And for the Hebrew, what they would do is have incense at the very core of their worship, because in the holy place where there was a table of showbread on one side and there was a golden lampstand on the other, at the very center there was this altar of incense mixed with special spices. This incense would rise up to God as a pillar of smoke. He would smell, was the idea, the aroma of their worship, but it would make the whole of Jerusalem beautiful as the winds blew it across the other mountainsides and valleys. And so the Bible says that our prayers are as incense to the Lord. Okay, and we'll talk more about that in a little bit. Secondly, look, the lifting of my hands are as the evening sacrifice. He prays that his prayers would be like the evening sacrifice. The Jews sacrificed in the morning. They sacrificed in the evening. But what I want to specifically point out to you, and we'll talk about this more at the end, is that the evening sacrifice was specifically a sacrifice of consecration, which consecration means the idea is they were giving themselves fully to the Lord. So they were saying in the evening, everything I've done, everything I will do, everything I am is yours, Lord. So the prayer is, as this prayer of David is surrounding his circumstances, enemies. That's where he's praying from. He prays, Lord, let my prayer come up as incense. Let my hands be to you as an evening sacrifice. Enemies are around me, but I am yours, Lord. Now the deal is he doesn't want to be kept in a place where he can fall. And so he wants safekeeping from wickedness. Essentially, just as the Lord's Prayer is, Lord, lead me not into temptation, but deliver me from the evil one. He doesn't want to put himself in a place where he can be dragged into the environment of the wicked. Set a guard, O Lord, over my mouth, verse 3. Keep watch over the door of my lips. Don't let me say anything that would be evil. And do not incline my heart to any evil thing, to practice wicked works with men who work iniquity. And do not let me eat of their delicacies. So don't let me listen to what they talk about, and don't let me desire what they enjoy. Verse 5, let the righteous strike me. It shall be kindness, and let him rebuke me. So let my friends who are righteous be able to say something to me, rebuke me, even if it hurts. The wounds of a friend, Proverbs says, they cleanse away evil. So do blows that hurt. And so he says, look, let them that are righteous strike me, accept it, and it'll be like excellent oil. Let my head not refuse it. Let not me refuse the rebukes of my righteous friends. And then he prays, for my prayer is against the deeds of the wicked. I want to be able to have a right perspective because people are rebuking me, to see evil for what it is, to be able to call good good, to be able to call evil evil, and then to pray against the deeds of the wicked, to stop wickedness. Their judges, that's the wickedness of this world, their judges, the wicked judges, are overthrown by the sides of the cliff or over a rock, and they hear my words, for they are sweet. I'm saying sweet things. They're hearing them, but they're rejecting them. Our bones are scattered at the mouth of the grave, as when one plows and breaks up the earth. So he says essentially those that are taken at the hand of the wicked, there in the wicked's heart is no respect of human life. There's no sanctity for human life. They take those they persecute, they scatter their bones. But, he says, in the midst of all this wickedness going on, in the oppression he feels, maybe even the fear, here's the transition in verse 8. My eyes are upon you, O God, the Lord. In you I take refuge. Do not leave my soul destitute or barren. Verse 9, keep me from the snares they have laid for me, and from the traps of the workers of iniquity. Let the wicked fall into their own nets, while I escape safely. So the psalmist prays against the ploys of the wicked. Now you guys understand that in our life, we have an enemy who is constantly setting snares for us. It's Christianity 101. And so as we take that into account, some seasons in our life, it's easy for us to see the traps. It's easy for us to see the way God has spoiled the snare of the fowler, as the psalmist writes in other places. It's easy for us to see where we are going to be in danger and avoid it. Other seasons, it's not so easy. But for me, this season has been very, very easy, so I will share with you, and hopefully some of the stories that I will share will encourage you, exhort you, convict you, and maybe grow you along your Christian journey. Now, as you know, I was in Sudan the last couple weeks, and I'll just give you a history of Sudan. I know most of you didn't come for a Sudanese history lesson, but sorry. Sudan, the name means place of the black. And so Sudan is interesting biblically because if you read your Bibles, in the Old Testament, Sudan are the Old Testament Ethiopians, or in Ezekiel, the nation of Cush, the Cushites. And so they have a place in the Bible in the Old Testament, and from the way I read my Bible, they have a significant place in the prophetic scene in the Bible to come, as human history plays itself out. Now, looking back, in the 17 and 1800s, what happened is Arabs, and we're talking about Muslim Arabs. Do you understand that not all Muslims are Arabic? So there can be Persian Muslims from modern-day Iran. Primarily, though, the Muslim world is of Arabic descent, okay, descendants of Ishmael. And so Arabs from the north, and by north I mean North Africa and the Middle East, came down in the 17s and 1800s, and they took from Sudan blacks to sell into European slavery. Okay, so if you ever read the story of David Livingstone, which I encourage you, if you want to read great missionary stories, read the life of David Livingstone. See me, I've got several biographies on David Livingstone. He, in the late 1700s, went to Africa to work to abolish slavery, okay? And what he was primarily doing was fighting against African tribal leaders who were selling their own people to primarily the Portuguese and sometimes the Arab slave traders. So what happened was the Muslims, because they had money from the Middle East, oftentimes they had greater education, they came down, they pillaged Africa. And in 1888, because of all the European influence in the area, primarily because of the slave trade, Europeans decided to divide Africa for themselves. And so Africa became, by and large, colonized by the Europeans. And so Sudan specifically was colonized by the Brits. And so it came under British rule. Now, in 1956, after almost 100 years of colonization, the British pulled out of the south of Sudan, in fact, all of Sudan, and they left it under Arab control because they deemed the Arabs more educated and more likely to be able to govern this huge region. And so in the north, which in 1956, it was all just Sudan, the capital became Khartoum. You hear a lot about that in the news, Khartoum. But what happened in 1956 when the British pulled out, the British had started all these churches in the south. It was much more cultivated in the south. It's not as desolate or barren, so they'd spent most of their time in the south planting churches. And Khartoum, which became the capital of the Muslim government, decided that they'd like to convert the south of Sudan, which was called primarily Christian, and really it's Christian and animist, which animist is like all these tribal spiritual beliefs, but they kind of mixed it all up. What the deal is they weren't Arab or Muslim. So these Muslims in the north decided, as soon as the British pulled out, to convert the south to Islam for two reasons. Number one, they want an Islamic world, and they wanted to use the south as a springboard for all these Eastern African countries. But number two, right here in this little town, you can barely see on what's now the border, is a town called Abaya. Might be able to see it over here, right along the red, right in there. And Abaya has oil, lots and lots of oil. So the northern Sudanese Arabs began to go south and try to conquer by the sword so that they could get control spiritually and they could get control of the oil, which they did. And to this day, they actually do filter a little money to the south, but for the most part, they're the ones in control of the oil. Now, all of that said, in 1957, because of a year of intense persecution from the north, the south, which is primarily Christian, as I told you, forms the SPLA, which is the Southern People's Liberation Army, to protect South Sudan from the northern invading Muslims, okay? And they fight, essentially. They're at war until 1972. In 1972, there's a ceasefire for about 10 years, and then in 1982, they start fighting again, fighting because the North is trying to come down and conquer, so the South is defending itself, and they fight from 1982 to 2005. Now, let me tell you this. If you meet a soldier in South Sudan and he's 40, which you won't find many that are 40, but if you meet a soldier that's 40, he's been fighting on the front lines since he was 9 years old. On the front lines without stop for except a few months out of his life. He's known front-line warfare, guerrilla warfare, since he was 9 years old. Now, in 2005, what happened was the UN was involved, and there was drawn up the CPA, or the Comprehensive Peace Agreement. And so what happened is it caused a ceasefire primarily. And in 2011, after several years of relative peace, the southern Sudanese people, they vote for independence, and they become their own nation. So below the red line, that's now South Sudan, okay? And it is the youngest and the poorest country in the whole world. So in 2011, they become independent on July 10th. That's their Independence Day. But because nations that haven't had independence don't always understand how to handle democracy, it's not as easy as we in America often think it is, then all of these tribal wars start to break out because there's all this regional power play. And so within South Sudan, these tribal wars start to break out. Because there's all these tribal wars, there's also instability in the high-up government between the vice president and the president, which is what this most recent conflict was about. We'll talk about in a second. But because of that, their form of currency, the pound, is taking a pounding. Daily, the thing is falling. So the nation's in disarray because they have no status economically, they have no stability governmentally, and the people's war-torn. You know, primarily they've been terrorized. Almost everyone has had multiple people displaced or killed by war, HIV, or some kind of trauma. And so they don't know how to live because emotionally, spiritually, practically, economically, physically, they're tore up. Okay? Now, that's how I got involved with far-reaching ministries. In 2002, a guy named Wes Bentley went over there, and he saw the people and their condition, and with his military background, he was able to start training up chaplains to deploy into the military to offer hope, to present the gospel, but to also then be as fingers, tentacles into these communities to identify need, to feed people, to clothe people, to save people. So in fact, even now, while essentially there is a ceasefire and there is peace between the North and the South, you may have heard of this region in the news called Darfur. Okay? It's over here. If you'll notice, it's in the north. But there's an intense war going on up in the north because now that the north doesn't attack the south because they're Christian and there's like this line drawn and there's some kind of ceasefire going on, the Arab Muslims have turned to the Darfur region. These are Muslims as well, but they're black. And the Arabs don't consider them light enough to be pure Muslims. So it's genocide based on race. Arabs killing black Muslims, Arabic Muslims killing black Muslims because they're not light enough. So the ministry that we're with, far-reaching, the chaplains are not only fighting when they hold the line here all the time. They hold this line so the north doesn't invade. And many of them are deployed around South Sudan with different battalions. But they fly in tons and tons of relief, medical aid, and other types of relief, food primarily, to the Darfur region because there's nothing. I actually have a video. I'm not going to show it to you. It's of war-torn Darfur where there are soldiers trying to stop a little boy who's been hit with an RPG from bleeding with bamboo strips because they don't have any medicine. So the people that we support, Far-Reaching Ministries, has been doing relief and military work for about 15 years now. Well, I was exposed to them in 2003 when the founder came to Maranatha Chapel where I was on staff. And so what happened was he came, just like a few months ago when one of their representatives, Edward Amaya, was here. He talked about what was going on. At that time, they had the second class was just graduating. This, by the way, the group that I was with in the last couple of weeks is the 10th class. Over 500 chaplains in 15 years deployed into the military. But this was the second class, and what he did is just like they had when they were here, they had these pictures of chaplains, and they had a little biography on them. And so you could pick a chaplain, and there's his little biography, and then you could support him for however much a month, right? And so by the time I got done, I was on staff there, so I was teaching the junior hires and I got done with the service. Out of like 7,000 people that went to our church, there were just a handful of these chaplains left, like 3 or 4. And so I went to the front office, and the secretary at the front office was Ray's, my pastor's, Aunt Lois. And Aunt Lois was kind of in on the nepotism plan. She chain smoked all the time. She was sitting out there. She had the list, and she goes, this guy right here, he's the one. Look at him, he's got grit. So that's how I picked my chaplain to support. Aunt Lois picked him out between Paul Malls. And so I went and I hung him up on the refrigerator, and I just, you know how sometimes when you support someone like this, I just connected with this guy. And so I prayed for him, and I supported him. And so, you know, we had a direct deposit. I don't really even think about the money going out every month, but the guy I'm praying for. And so then when I came here to plant the church in 2010, this was the first global organization we supported because I had connections. You know, we started supporting a few people locally, the Pregnancy Resource Center, and then we supported these guys. I never really thought I'd get to go. I had been praying when I was at Maranatha that I would get to go someday and teach, but then I stopped praying that prayer because now I was kind of in Missouri, I was detached. But then in 2008, I guess I planted the church in 2005, not 2010. That's been a long week. So in 2008, 3 years after I planted the church, they called me, my pastor, and said, hey, we're going to Sudan. Would you like to go? And so I had the opportunity to go with this large group and train. It was like basically a pastor's conference for the chaplains. They brought them in out of the field, the ones they could, and we taught them for a couple weeks. Well, I took a letter for my guy that I had supported to give to him. And when I got there, the founder, Wes's wife, she kind of oversees all the chaplains administratively. I gave her the letter, and she goes, well, this guy's gone. I go, what do you mean gone? She goes, well, look, not all of them make it. Like, they just quit. Some of them just go home. I mean, not a lot of them. Most of them have a lot of grit, but every once in a while we just lose some guys, and we think this is one of the unfaithful ones. Like, we can't reach them. And I was like, she goes, I'll give it to him if we get in touch with him. So, man, I'm just grieved for my guy, you know. And so when I come home, I'm praying that he'll repent, you know, that he'll turn back to Jesus. I know the way's hard. I'm praying all these prayers for him. About 2 years later, they send me a notice in the mail, and it says, your guy is no longer with Far Reaching Ministries. Here's another guy. And they give me a guy in his place. And I never connect with this guy. I hang his deal on my refrigerator. I don't even know his name. I don't even pray for him. I'm sorry to admit that. I just send money to this guy every month that comes out of my check. I don't even think about it. I always pray for the other guy that was my first guy, right? So now, flash forward. I tried to go back in 2009. I was scheduled to go back to Sudan in 1 week before I was supposed to go. Baby Luke was born, and he had all these heart problems, and so I had to cancel 1 week before. After that, my health collapsed, and really, you know, we got involved with India, and I felt like for the church it was better for me to lead teams than it was to go someplace where I couldn't take anyone else with me. So Sudan, I would pray for it. I just never really thought it would be something I could do. When Edward Amaya came in February, he asked me to go again. I said no. Lucinda wasn't really for it. The board was definitely not for it. I didn't really want to go away from home because I was leaving for seminary as well. And so then about 8 weeks ago, they called me back, as I've told you guys, and they said, hey, we had 2 guys drop out, and we were praying, and you're the only name God gave us. And I thought, well, if you guys were praying and I'm the only name God gave you, I better pray and see if God gives me my name, you know. So he did, right? And then the board was all of a sudden for it. My wife was like, well, yeah, you got to do that. And so we decided it was time to go. And so I went, and, it's like 31 hours of travel to Uganda, and then I had a day layover in Kampala. And then I got on the MAF, which is Missionary Aviation Fellowship, kind of small plane. It held about 10 people. And we were flying into the bush. It's a bush plane, a bigger one, but, it's still a bush plane nevertheless. And when we got ready to take off, the pilot says, man, where are you going? I go, Nemly. He goes, well, you're going to have a long day. We stopped at every mud hole in North Uganda and Western Sudan. In fact, by the time we got to Sudan, I didn't know where I was. I didn't know any of these towns. They're going, we're in, you name it. And I didn't know. We'd fly for an hour, we'd land. And so I actually got off the plane at one point, and I thought we were still in Uganda, and I walk up. Every place I go, they're trying to get money out of me. And so there's a guy literally in northern Uganda. He's under a tarp, and he's the customs guy. And all I got to do is urinate. And he's like, no, you got to pay the... I'm like, I'm not stopping here. I'm not... No, so I finally have to fill out a form and have him stamp me so I can go urinate. I didn't give him any money, though. I'm like, you're not getting any money from me. But finally, we land in Sudan. I thought we were still in Uganda. When I arrived, they're wanting money from me so that I can, come into the country. I'm like, why are these Ugandans wearing South Sudanese clothes? I'm like all disoriented because I don't know where we are. Anyway, long story short, 10 hours later, I get there. It takes me 10 hours. I stop 5 times on this bush plane. It's raining sideways. We're landing on these runways that are full of mud holes. The thing's hydroplaning. Then it's getting stuck. It was like a mud bog. And they're like trying to figure out how we're going to get it back on the runway. Then they overload it to the degree that the thing will barely take off. We're like, praise the Lord, we're up over the tree line. Now if we can just land this thing. So we get there, and I get there, and they say, here's your room. and the chaplains are ready for you. There's 97 of them still with this group. Would you like to teach, or would you like to just say hi? I'm wasted. Let's just say hi. So I walk in, I say hi. It's like 5 minutes. I tell them, this is what we're going to do tomorrow. Be ready. And then as I'm leaving, this guy comes up to me and says, hey, the one who had gotten me situated, he says, there's this man wants to meet you. And so I turn around, it's this skinny guy right here. And he's this emaciated, skinny-looking figure. And he says, this guy, he wants to meet you. And this guy tells me, his name and who he is. And I go, what? Tell me your name again. His name was Santino Luau. That's my chaplain. That's the guy my first chaplain. And what I found out is he didn't leave the ministry. He was trapped behind enemy lines since 2005, living from hand to mouth. And here's the deal, guys. This will make the hair stand up on the back of your neck. He arrived that day. He'd been gone for 11 years, and he arrived the day I got there. So he and I connected. I told him, I'm speechless. I'm like, you're not even going to believe this. So I start telling him. And Santino gets a lot of English, but he kind of speaks English. And he's like got this air of authority. Now he's sick. He's got tuberculosis. His eyes were all, he was down to like 90-some pounds. He's 6'5" or something. And so he says, I pray for him. He says, oh, thank you. He shows up at dinner that night. He's sitting with the senior officers because they're trying to get him well. And so we're all eating in silence. And then after it's over, I get up to go, and he gets up, and then he says to me, I'm going to urinate. You stay here. I'm talking to you. I said, okay, buddy, you got it. You go urinate, you come back. It's very plain. Here's what I'm doing. Here's what you're doing. But then he just gets to tell me his story. And the chaplains all said, and these guys are tough, man. They say he was in the worst spot you can be in for 11 years. And they're like, he's so faithful. So here, I knew right then, I don't know what else is going to happen, but this was for sure one of the main reasons I was there. Now, I get there on a Tuesday, and so Wednesday morning, I get up at 5. The chaplains run every morning. They run 8 miles before breakfast. So I got up at 5, and I got ready to go run with them. I told them the day before I was going to run, and they said, they call it, all the white men, they call in Arabic kawaija, which means kind of like soft, rich white guy, which is kind of like honky here. It's really what it amounts to. So they said, kawaija, you will not make it. And so I said, well, I'm going to go ahead and run. The senior chaplain, which is this guy, was not there. He was out because of some issues. So he's the only guy I knew. This is Michael Tombe. I had met him before. They were making fun of me. They said, you will not make it up to the top of Gordon's Hill. I said, well, who will carry me? They laughed at that. So they let me go. Well, when we took off running at 5 a.m., and we start up Gordon's Hill, which is about, a hill there. It's like Tom Sauk Mountain. It's like running up Tom Sauk Mountain, essentially. So we take off, and we get, we're running in cadence, and, we're running at an okay clip. And then we get right to, I can see the top. There are towers up there, and they stop. And I go, why do we stop? Everybody's stretching. I can tell we're getting ready to turn back. And the little senior officer who I was running with, he goes, we stopped because you can't handle it. And I said, what do you mean I can't handle it? And he goes, no, we can't get you hurt the first day. So they have to run. Now, remember, they have to run in formation even if we're picking up the pace. So what they do is they run about 95 of them in a group, and then 2 guys up front. One carries a flag. Okay, he carries this South Sudanese People's Liberation Army chaplain's flag. But see, I don't have to stay in cadence in line because I'm not a chaplain. So when we start down, I'm ticked off. So I break out of line, I run past everybody, I go grab the flag, and I take off running as fast as I can. So, I ran the wheels off these guys on the way downhill. But by the way, if they wanted to catch me, they could have done it. But so they said, well, we've seen you can do 6 miles. Let's see if you can do 8 tomorrow. So the next day I get up, and I'm all ready. It's 5 a.m. in the morning. I'm ready. I'm like, but I know they're going to punish me. Now it's on, and these dudes can run. So I'm like, it's going to hurt today. So I get up. I go through the little door in the gate. They've got the big gate that they open for vehicles. Everybody else goes through this little gate that's like 4 feet high, the safety gate. And when I get out, they go, Kawaja, you can't run with us this morning. I'm like, what do you mean? I start to mouth them like, are you scared of Kawaja? And they're like, Kawaja can't run. They're serious. The weather's bad. I'm looking around, I'm like, it's 59, 62 degrees. It's like light winds. I'm like, what kind of weather do you need in Africa to run? This is like perfect running weather. This is like the best running weather ever. They're like, weather's bad, go inside. And I'm like, what? I'm arguing with them, and then finally I see a guy come out with an AK-47, and I realize they don't run with their weapons typically. So I'm not real bright, but I get that like the military weather's bad. Like it's not safe, and they won't let me run. So they send me back in. And from the time I was there, the weather just kept getting worse and worse. It's what it amounted to. So the next night, which was like Friday, it was the day before their National Independence Day, and fighting broke out in Juba. And because what happened was that in Juba, which is their capital, which was about an hour from me, there's a vice president and a president. The president fired the vice president, and the vice president has money and power, so as soon as he was fired, he arranged a full-on army and started messing with the actual army of South Sudan and the president. So what they did is they had some peace talks, and they had it at the Capitol building in Juba. And so when the vice president came behind closed doors to visit the president for these peace talks, the president's security guards, they were the ones, it was their Capitol building, in control, so they frisked the security team of the vice president a little too hard, mouthed them, made fun of them. They start, and if you think about what we're actually looking at this morning, Psalm 141, one word set this whole thing off. They were disrespectful. They didn't set a guard over their mouth to the vice president's security force. They got mad when the president and the vice president go behind closed doors. They literally get into like a schoolboy fighting match, and it turns into an all-out war with helicopters and tanks. They're killing people wholesale. Now, what also happens is there's all these other rebel groups, and it's just like America. As soon as there's violence in one city, what happens in all other cities? So now these rebel groups just decide to start killing people. This is a good opportunity. So they tell us, look, the rebels are coming here. They're going to sack the town we're in. And so they set me down that night. They give me the bomb shelter drill. Like, when the RPGs start coming in, go to the bomb shelter. Don't go outside until someone comes and gets you. I figured at this point I'm not going to be able to talk them into a gun if they won't even let me run with anyone. So they'd do us the whole drill. But long story short, the chaplains go on patrol all night long. And fortunately, the town I was in is a border town and also a port city, so it had a couple battalions of regular soldiers. But that said, thing keeps getting worse and worse and worse until finally they're essentially evacuating everyone from South Sudan because the fighting is out of control. Anyone that's not South Sudanese or Ugandans getting evacuated. In fact, I sat on the plane from Uganda to Amsterdam yesterday with a guy who I could tell was Special Forces. I'm guessing he was a Navy SEAL. And he was there evacuating the U.S. Embassy. So everybody's out, right? Now, for me, the problem is I'm getting ready to get out, but I don't want to go, by the way. I'm there to teach chaplains. So I can tell it's inevitable, but I figure I got just one last-ditch effort. I mean, I'm from Missouri. I'm a little stubborn, so I like, look, please just let me stay. I'm not afraid to die. I mean, I came here knowing what the risks were. And so I can tell they're not going to let me go, but I finally tell them, I'm like, look, like, why in the world is my life more important than you guys' life? Like, it doesn't make sense for you to evacuate me, although I know the reason. I figure maybe this will work. And the senior chaplain, my good friend Michael, he finally looks at me in front of everybody and he goes, it really doesn't matter your life more than us, except that if Kawaja dies, it's a big problem for us. It's a big headache. Like, if you die, you cause us problems. And, you know, the reality is if I die, it hurts the ministry. It hurts everything else. So I got to get out. Now, the problem with getting out is, you know, Sudan's kind of like the Hotel California. You can get in anytime you like, but you can never leave. So the problem is, you know, I'm up here in South Sudan, and the problem is the Missionary Aviation Fellowship now won't fly back into South Sudan because they don't want to get a plane shot down by an RPG. So, or a surface-to-air missile or whatever. So they're only flying out way over here, okay, in northern Uganda, which means I was over here, so I got to drive down, and then I got to drive all the way over here. Then they're evacuating every missionary and NGO, which is non-government organization, in all of South Sudan, and they all fly MAF, which is Missionary Aviation Fellowship. So if I get here, then I've got to wait in line with all the people flying from here all the way down to Kampala, which is a 2-hour trip one way for a pilot, okay? And they've only got 5 planes as far as I know. So long story short, Far Reaching Ministries decides to evacuate me by vehicle. So I come to the border in Emily and I come through. The funny thing is, I get through the border, and this is good. I really felt good about myself here. I finally get through the border, and I get out, and I have to, as soon as I get across the border, run into this Ugandan police officer right here, and kind of an immigration officer, customs. And he looks at my passport, and he says, really bad in South Sudan. I go, yeah. And he goes, why are you leaving? And I said, the weather's bad. He thought that was funny. He knew, I guess it's an expression. He thought that was good. He slapped me on the back and let me go. So then we started driving, and we drove 9 hours all the way down. There's only like three major roads that are paved in Uganda, but this one runs all the way down to Kampala. So that's what we did. So then I arrived in Kampala. Now, when I was on my way, I called Far Reaching Ministries, and I said, this was Monday. Just bump my flight up. I'm ready to come home, because nothing that I wanted to accomplish got accomplished. But then after I got a hold of them, I was able to call Lucinda, and she goes, well, why are you coming home? Like, there's lots of stuff for you to do in Kampala. Go do something for Jesus if you flew around the world. So I decided to stay. So I kept my plane ticket, and it really turned out to be a blessing, because I got to meet Daryl Woodson. So if you take the hair off that guy, he looks just like Brian, because that's Brian Woodson's brother. So Brian Woodson's brother has been a missionary in Kampala, Uganda for 17 years. And he's got arguably, he probably is arguably one of the 3 most influential pastors, if you're talking about like pastors that are solid, in all of Kampala, a city of 6 million people. Now, there are a bunch of health and wealth guys over there that I wouldn't trust. I wouldn't trust him as far as I could throw him, but he's a good guy. And so he actually has this large church, and he's a church planner. And so what he did was, once he found out I was there, he said, hey, why don't you come by? I'm training up 30 church planners to send out in teams in August. And he said, come by and teach on conflict resolution. So I said, well, I don't know if I can resolve, I don't know much about resolving conflict, but I've caused a bunch in my day. So, I went and I got to teach these 30 church planners and his staff, about 10 or 15 more folks, on conflict resolution. And he and I got to hang out together all day long. And so that's his beautiful family. I took him out, and he took me to his house then. And so he's from Southern California. He married a Malaysian, and they live in Uganda, so you go figure that out. But it was tremendous. It was a real unexpected opportunity since I stayed over. Now, finally, this is the final story. I'm going to run over about 10 minutes, but you guys are used to it. And by the way, I didn't say this is a short story, just a quick, because Nikki Sample said, you know what, don't ever say this to make a long story short, because, your stories are never short. I said, well, you should know that. You should know that. I have lots of stories, but they're never short. So even if I say this is short, it'll be long, but it's not going to be as long as it would be if I didn't say it was going to be short. So this guy here, these guys are from Alarm. Whoa, there's the application. Don't look! Don't look! Don't look! Okay, now, whoa! Now, okay. So these guys are from Alarm Ministries, and it's African Leadership and Reconciliation Ministry. Now, to back up, you guys, some of you will remember that before I was going to Portland for seminary, I had told you that, one of the things that had happened to me the first time I was in Sudan is I was over there teaching. This chaplain got up, and he asked me, he said, I've got a question. I said, I'm here to answer all your questions. I'm from America. Well, I ask away. He says, this guy killed my whole family in my village, and I see him every week. How do I forgive him? And I had no answer for him. I could answer from the Bible, but experientially, how do I deal with that? I just don't live on that level. Frankly, they kind of laugh at us in Africa. They're like, you guys have daddy problems. We've got genocide problems. It's just a different deal. I mean, our deal is still our deal. Okay, I'm not minimalizing it, but it's just a different kind of trauma. So when they called me, about 8 weeks ago and asked me to go, to tell you the truth, the one thing I was most reticent about was this haunting question that I still couldn't answer with any viability. So I also told you that before I was going to seminary, they issued me a book called Forgiving as We've Been Forgiven by a guy named Celestin Musikura, who was a Rwandan genocide survivor. And he co-wrote this book with a Dallas theologian from Dallas Theological Seminary. The guy did all the biblical work from America, and then this guy, who's also a doctorate, he holds from Dallas Theological. This guy wrote kind of here's the practical side of it, living through it, as a genocide survivor. I also told you that in that book, he talks about how the guy who killed his family, that guy's son now watches his mother when he's in the United States. There's been such reconciliation. Now, all that said, I went to seminary, and I had tried to get a hold of the guy. I emailed him and said, hey, I'd love to get together with you. I know he's a national speaker, and I don't ever look at my, I don't ever look at my plane itineraries. I didn't know what I was taking in Bible college. I just knew I had to read these books, and I was going to take a class at seminary. So I arrived, and that guy taught my class for 3 days. And when he found out that I was going to Sudan in a couple weeks, he was really, really, we connected because he knew all the guy, he knew far-reaching ministries. And so he understood. So he said, hey, I operate in 8 countries in East Africa, and one of them is Uganda, and our head office is in Kampala. Now, here's the cool thing. I didn't tell you this. When I arrived, Kampala is a city of 6 million people. It can literally take any time in the middle of the day 5 to 7 hours to get from one side to the other because the traffic's so bad. Both Daryl Woodson and these guys live within 5 minutes of where I was staying. So they both came and picked me up. So these guys come and pick me up. Now, on the left is a guy named Wilberforce, and I had corresponded with him by email. But when I was picked up, I met this guy, Pius. Now, the funny thing is this. Let me tell you something. I've been trying to impress upon you for years, but I want to do it again. Christ is relational. Christianity is a relational Christianity. So these guys picked me up, and I'll tell you this, that they were very formal, which is kind of the case often in these countries, and they're calling me sir, and they were explaining the ministry. It was kind of like, here's what we do. Tremendous stuff. Reconciliation, they're working with police forces to teach people servant leadership because police forces have never even heard the concept of servant leadership. You're just a police officer so you can extort money and use your power for your own gain. They're working with pastors because so many of them have been hurt by genocide or by death or by loss that they're actually teaching their own churches to retaliate because they don't know how to handle the pain. They work at all these levels with reconciliation and forgiveness. But I meet this guy, and so, they were very, very formal. I'm at their office 3 hours, and it's here's what we do. So then they take me back, and they say, we're going to take you out to eat at Kentucky Fried Chicken. It's the brand new Kentucky Fried Chicken in a gas station. It's a new thing in Kampala. So I'm like, in a gas station, I get to eat. So I go, and as we're going, this guy kind of jokes, Wilberforce, he says, hey, you paying? And slaps me on the back and laughs, which I know they don't have any money. So I go, yeah, I'm paying. Eat any Kentucky Fried Chicken you want. So as soon as I tell that to them, the whole thing changes. They start laughing. They start smiling. I follow up with, in America they say, everybody loves a little KFC. And that guy laughs and goes, in Africa too. So we get done. We devour some KFC. I'm talking devour it. And then by the time, so here's what happens. Everything changes. And halfway through the conversation, this guy says, we say in Africa that the way to a man's heart is through his stomach. That relationships happen from the head to the mouth, to the stomach, to the heart. And so by the time they left, they were like, we'll see you next time. We'll eat Pizza Hut with you. It's brand new here too. So, but this guy Pius, now this is what I want to close, and I got a couple, so I'm not actually closing. This is like a Paul close. This is a closing story like Galatians. But then I'm going to give you some application hopefully. So this guy Pius was who I wanted to tell you about. He's the director of this whole ministry. And he said he really likes the work they do in the community because primarily that work is with families and children. And so what you got to know in Uganda is now the average life expectancy is up to 50 years old, but just when he grew up it was 40 years old, and like almost no dads exist. And because of promiscuity, HIV, and AIDS, it takes the lives of many, many people. It's crazy. The abuse on children is off the charts. It's like the number 3 alcoholism country in the world, given what people make and how much money that dad spends on alcohol compared to how much then goes to the children. You could just do all the crazy statistics, but he said, I was one of the kids that I'm now helping. So I said, well, Pius, like, what's your story? How are you the director? You've been to university. He's had some jobs in the government that he actually turned down because he couldn't be a government official without being corrupt. You can't be, like, you guys don't understand, America, we have a lot of problems. And truthful is, all the stuff shaping up, we're not too many steps behind Sudan, the way people are unhappy and ignorant and armed. But that said, at the same time, we're nowhere near the corruption level, because this guy couldn't even be a low-level official without being corrupt. So he resigned. But he's successful. He got on staff at Alarm. He's a deep Christian. And I said to him, Pius, what makes you different than all the kids you grew up with? Many of them are dead. Many of them didn't go to college. Almost none of them are doing anything other than riding around on a motorcycle in the marketplace if they've really done well delivering goods. He said, get this, I was a Compassion International kid. Mittermeyers were up here a few weeks ago. We had 2 adopted from our church. I'm thankful for that, but only 2. He said, I've never met the people who sent me money every month, but they got me to university. You see, the money that most of us, and I know some of you guys in here don't have extra, but the money most of us have left over, or cheeseburger money, or I'm not going to, at least, if I go to the Redneck Riviera this year, I'm not going to parasail money. If I go to Branson, I'm not going to see the show money. Actually changes a kid's life. It's just something to think about. Pretty amazing. Now, all that said, here's the application at last. I want to pick out a few things that the Lord has been showing me these last 2 weeks from this particular psalm. First one is from verse 2. Our prayer is a sweet smell to the Lord. Guys, I just keep having emphasized in my life, our prayers, the Lord loves. In Revelation chapter 5, verse 8 and 8, verse 3, it says again that they're stored up before the throne and they're sweet smelling to the Lord. And here's the thing I love about prayer. You don't even have to be like on point. I know the Bible says you have not, but you ask not, but I was praying for 10 years for Santino Luau to be saved. And the guy's going to be so far in line ahead of me in heaven, I'm not even going to see him, right? When he got ready to pray for dinner, it's like Moses came down from the mountain. He's like, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, bless the chicken. We weren't even having chicken. It's like there's nothing here but the beans and the rice and this nasty cabbage stuff I can't even eat. And Santino Luau's like, every day I saw him, I'm like, Santino, you're getting better. His eyes clear up. He goes, the power of the blood of Jesus. I mean, you're like, what in the world? And I'm praying for the guy to be saved. Like, Lord, let him come back to you. But God hears, right? He loves the fact that we talk to him. That's the deal. It's relational. If you pray because you got to, or you pray because you want stuff, you're missing it. I mean, hey, your dad, if you want I love it as a dad to give my boys stuff. But the reality is, I like the fact that they ask me. We've talked about that before. So our prayers are stored, they're savored by the Lord, and they're answered, okay? Now, secondly, I want to point out to you in that same verse, verse 2, the psalmist prays that he could lift up his hands as the evening sacrifice. I told you that sacrifice was one of full consecration, and consecration means full surrender to the Lord. And I want to impress upon you that a fully consecrated life is a life full of surprises. And I don't know about you, but I think the right heart as a Christian should love surprises. Like if you're a person who doesn't ever want the Lord to surprise you, you got the wrong God. And you probably don't have a very good relationship with the God that you got. Because Look, our God is a God of surprises. He's the only one that doesn't change. And I'll tell you this, the reason I truly believe that most of us in America don't see God do surprising things in our life is because the only way he can is for him to force himself upon us, essentially. We schedule our days so full of stuff that we say, Lord, if you can meet me in this schedule, then we're going to do some good stuff together. You know what I mean? Like, Lord, as long as you're good with me doing everything I've got on our list today, then we're going to be good. But then as soon as he throws us a curveball, our natural inclination is to kick and scream and be so upset that we don't get to accomplish what we decided that, you know what, now we can't even see what he's doing. And so the reality is this, that God, he desires us, sure, to plan. He's okay with that. Fill your day full as long as you understand that really the good stuff typically happens in the divine interruptions. And I have learned to stack my day as full as possible because I want to be productive, but also be ready for the divine interruption. On a missions trip, it's much easier to see this. But I'd say that if your life is mundane and it's checking off the list and it's doing your stuff, by the way, in America, we medicate ourselves with busyness. We just do. It's why we don't hear from the Lord. It's why we don't see the surprises of the Lord. It's because we are accomplishment-oriented. But a fully consecrated life has to say, Lord, if my life is not my own, then, Lord, you do with it what you will. But see, sometimes that puts us also at risk physically. And the reality is we can try to hang on to our life as much as we want, but people with the airbags and eating only nuts and fruits and drinking super juices, they die on 67 every week. And they've got Germ-X on when they do it. Now, that said, finally, Jesus died to save us, okay? He died to save us. I mean, think about the truth of the gospel. The thing that we're all trying to avoid, if we're all honest, he died to save us from. Death. We can't deal with the thing physically because we've been affected spiritually. So Jesus deals with the spiritual so that we can deal with the physical thing, right? So the sting is at least taken off because of the blood of Christ. But here's what I want to share with you. Why does Jesus save us? Some of you know, we've covered it before. It's not so that we can make it to 69 or 72 and get a crown of wisdom, which is a gray head, and then spend 6 months in Florida or Texas and 6 months here. Although if you do that, there's not to say there's anything wrong with that. But the point is the American goal seems to be almost that. And so people, even when they're thinking about sponsoring a Compassion International kid, typically this is it. And I understand if you go to some Dave Ramsey seminar, and forgive me, I'm not a Dave hater. I just don't really care for it that much. That said, the point is painted like getting your financial life in order is about the only thing that matters. And it does a bunch, believe me. But the reality is, you know, what if God told you to support a Compassion International kid and it was at the expense of your 401k or your retirement? If you have that, reality is most Americans give anything they give to God after their 401k comes out, after taxes comes out. Then if they tithe on whatever's left from that, if they tithe at all, or if they tithe 10%. And then if they do anything above that, it's after they make sure they're taken care of for life, and then, you know, we don't really want to mess up anything else in our life after Disney World is already paid for. And look, we have to be responsible, but the point is, Jesus died to save us, but he didn't die for us to live comfortably. Now, if we can, that's okay. Like, when we do, you know, the reality is anybody in here living the worst that we live in America lives better than Sudan. And look, don't check out on me just yet, because Todd McKinney always says, I hate it when you go on a missions trip because you come back and you're so irritating. Like, you know, you get all the, I'm not trying to bash on us. We've been given a lot, you know, and you don't have to be apologetic for having been given a lot. And you don't have to be apologetic for trying to prepare for old age. You know, Proverbs says, look, if you can leave something off to your kids, you've done a good thing. But I'm just trying to tell you, we've been given eternal life not to just make it to 70 years, and get another picture on the Book of Face where we did something fun. The Book of Face, everybody's like this. Is your life really like that? Like the whole thing, I mean, the any picture I typically ever put on the Book of Face is like behind the scenes there was a bunch of conflict. Like I was almost to choke Nathaniel and Luke, and then I like made them get in the picture and forced them to smile. The Book of Face, it's like, we got to get one more thing we can put on that sucker. That's kind of how we live our lives, looking for these high water marks, these, let's relieve the pressure point marks. And summer's really, really bad about that. But here's the thing, that's not what God saved us for. If we can have some of those things, good deal. But in the middle of it, we need to remember, look, God, He leaves us on this earth for whatever time He does because He saved us and He wants us to be ministers of reconciliation. Do you understand me? Like everything we've got is a blessing, but are we loose-handed enough with it to, maybe your deal is not going to Sudan. Maybe your deal is not even supporting a Compassion International kid. I'm not saying you should. All I'm saying is to take what you've got and see, like, Lord, am I really using my time, my money, my talents, to whatever degree God's given us, all different stuff, am I really, like, using it for Jesus? I can never leave the Parkland and be very effective. Okay, but I can also go, and here's the cool thing. You guys sent me. Some of you don't know you sent me. Others of you prayed for me vehemently, and I'm thankful. But you sent me, and the Bible says that I went around the world and got to be evacuated from a third world country in the midst of a civil war, while you got to stay right here. And you know what happens? In heaven, we both get the same reward. God bless you guys. You didn't have to do anything other than be here and be a part. So I'm just asking you to look at your lives and go, look, Jesus died for me, for more than me, just to in summer especially, make it to the Redneck Riviera or to get to Branson, Hillbilly Heaven. I always joke with the samples. I'm like, Nikki thinks that heaven's going to be Hillbilly Heaven. She's like praying for it. She's like, if there's not a show and there's not a Silver Dollar City, I'm not going to heaven. But even when we're doing that stuff, to see that it's not Jesus off and my time on, it's like I can be a minister of reconciliation out of my day-to-day, my routine. You got me? So, thank you for letting me share that. Psalm 141, forgive me because we didn't really do you any justice. And God, use us to be ministers of reconciliation. Father, we want to thank you. Thank you for the attention of this group as we went a little long. Thank you for stories to tell of your reconciliation. Lord, thank you for giving us resources that we can actually be people that are agents of change with the stuff you've given us. And Lord, we're of all different age groups, and we're of all different places in life. Lord, thank you for the different seasons of life, that we can be effective as we begin careers as we can in retirement. We can be effective as we are in middle age, when we're youth or even children, if we give our lives to you, wholly consecrated. And Lord, what I really pray for this group, and I do see a lot of it, I pray that they don't feel condemned. If they feel anything, conviction or encouragement, Lord, I see a bunch of people trying to do what they do for you. And Lord, just to reevaluate, it's never bad. And to see, Lord, where if we've cooled, if we've hoarded, if we've protected, or Lord, if we can be open-handed with what you've given us, with our money, with our time, with our talent, with our very lives, Lord. That you take away the fear of death, that we really have boldness, and that we could live for others, Lord, which is what you left us here for. And so we thank you and we praise you for the opportunity to get to just be along for the ride. And we pray that you'd help us cast nets and bring others in as well. In Jesus' name.